My teacher laughed at me. I was 18 years old, and it was the first week of a new semester at a university I had just transferred to from another university 3 states away. I was a music composition student, and this was my first session with my professor. It was a private session, and I played for him my best composition, what I thought was my best. And he asked me if I was trying to imitate Carmina Burana, music by Carl Orff. Carmina Burana, it's used in some movies. And it's at that moment that I realized I was an imposter. What I was doing was just consciously or unconsciously copying other people's music. And I quit going to class, got a job at night, making donuts at a donut shop, working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And a couple months later, my parents drove up from 3 states away to find out what was going on. For years, I sometimes have this dream that it's the last day of the semester and I've missed all of my classes. Anyway, eventually I became a computer programmer and got really interested in artificial intelligence and ended up building a artificial intelligence system to compose music. But I wanted this system to make it impossible to copy other people's music. So it's not going to glue together little bits of the DNA of some other composers. I think as artists, there's nothing satisfying about just copying, mimicking other people's ideas. If we look deep into our innermost, there's nothing satisfying about just being a copy of someone else. That's not art. I like what the poet Goethe wrote when he said, "Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has magic and power and genius in it." Did you notice the music for that opening animation sequence? That's something that I created with the assistance of RoboComposer. Composed it using what I call hints, little hints that I give to the composition engine. They're instructions in an ordinary text file. I guess the best way to describe a hint is to show you what a hint file looks like. It's kind of like a language that's intended for both machine and human. So this might not make a lot of sense at this point in time. Don't worry. We're going to be doing some of these and take it from very simple ones, but you'll notice I give it a name called Go Faster, and there's instructions for strings, and you may be able to see FF for fortissimo, the octaves, and number of voices, that's polyphonic, and some information about rhythmic and melodic cells. And there's several lines of hints here for what the strings are doing, what the woodwinds are doing, etc. And down here are some more lines with named hints for melodic cells and rhythmic cells. And the idea of how this works is you predefine these, what I'm going to call textures. And then once you've got a texture set up in your library, anytime you need that music to have that same kind of feel, you just call that same texture. And I'll show you what that looks like. So we've predefined a script called Go Faster. All we need to do to get music that sounds like Go Faster is have a script that does this, and it'll find it in your library, the Go Faster, and you can tell it what your tempo and how many beats you want it to have. So I think what I need to do next is tell you a little more about what RoboComposer is. So RoboComposer is we've already said it's a text to music system, but it's not like the text to music systems that you may have heard of that work like on hints such as, I want music that is inspirational for the sun rising over the mountaintops and glistening and glimmering on the water. It's nothing like that. The type hints that you're going to be providing are going to be like melodic fragments, rhythmic fragments, and instructions of what register and you want that in and what instruments you want performing it. And it's kind of like little pieces of DNA, and then RoboComposer will take those little pieces, kind of like seeds, and grow the complete composition from that. It's a downloadable desktop application. So the way it works is you go to the website, you create a free user account, you're going to download the apps to your desktop computer. Setup is very easy, and then you're going to run a scan process that will look in folders that you tell it and find all of your virtual instruments. And so one of the things that makes RoboComposer so useful is that it uses your own virtual instruments that you've created. And so that helps you create your own signature sound. And that originality is very important to a lot of composers. So if you want to have your own sound, you don't want to use a AI system that's just gluing together little bits of the DNA of 1,000 other composers in a blender, and out comes this generic music. So it's your hints, it's your virtual instruments. So what I'm going to do is show you how to use it. But before we do that, I think I want to just take a minute and tell you what I think is coming very soon with AI. AI is already creating movie storylines, scripts. It's generating images and video and also music. And so there's going to be tremendous opportunity for what I call pizza in a movie, where you're going to be able to go to a website, order a movie, order a pizza, and it comes to you. But before we get there, there's also going to be what I call movies for micro audiences, where instead of a big blockbuster movie that millions and millions of people go see, this movie will have a micro budget for maybe 1,000 viewers or 100 viewers. And so the AI is going to generate the storyline, the video. The opportunity for the composer is going to be, if they have an automated way to create the music with it, and they're collaborating with the producers of the movie, then they can participate in that. But they're going to need a very fast workflow that doesn't depend on waiting for inspiration. What I want to do next is show you the RoboComposer website, and I'm going to show you how you sign up for a free user account. I'm going to show you where the download page is, and I'll also show you where the documentation is. So I'm looking now at robocomposer.com at the home page, and I want to point out a few things. First, here on the bottom left, there is a button you can click where you can hear a sample of something created by RoboComposer. There's also this little line of text here where you can click, and up pops some more samples of music created by RoboComposer. And that's just to give you kind of an idea and a feel for what some of the possibilities are. And I'm going to close that. To sign up, you're going to click this button and up pops this window. You can read a little bit about what you're going to get here. There's links to the terms of service, privacy policy. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my name, email address. And then I'm going to click that big orange button. And then up pops a window and it's asking for an access code. So what's happening now is RoboComposer system is sending you a secret access code. You'll find that in your email. You may need to look in your spam folder, junk folder, find that message. It may take anywhere from a few seconds to a few minutes. If you don't get the message, then just click here where it says, send me the code again. And when you get that code, paste it there and click OK. Now, I want to show you where the download is. That's on the Quick Start page. The Quick Start page, I'm just going to scroll down here where it says Download. That's where you download RoboComposer. And it's in a zip file. You click on that, downloads, you'll find it in your download folder on your computer, and then you're going to unzip that. Also on the website, you may find it helpful to look at the documentation page. Documentation has several PDF files that will tell you, like what I'm about to show you, how to download, how to scan and set up connections to your virtual instrument plugin, also about the Orpheus scripting language. Now, your free user account will come with several minutes of free usage of the RoboComposer system. But after you've used those free minutes, hopefully you've fallen in love with it, you'll want to buy more minutes. So here on the pricing page, you'll find pricing for buying additional bundles of minutes. So now I'm going to go ahead and look at my desktop. And here you'll see there's the zip file. If you want to open that, you can look, you'll see there's a file folder called RoboComposer. And inside of it are several files. And what you're going to do is copy that and put it in your C drive right in the root directory in a subfolder called RoboComposer. You can see there. Then you're going to want to click into that. And what I recommend doing at this point is set up some desktop shortcuts. I'll just take you through this and show you what these are for. The WAV file, that's where you're going to find your audio file that's generated by the composition process. PDF is going to have your printed musical score. Hint queue is where you're going to put the hint file in a queue. You can put multiple files in there. That's why it's called a queue, and it'll work through them one by one when you start the composition process. And then archive will be where those hint files are copied after the composition process is finished. I also recommend creating a desktop shortcut for the plugin manager and the batch composer. Now, we're looking at my desktop, and I've created these shortcuts to the folders that I showed you, and also the plugin manager and the batch composer. Before we go any further, there's one very important thing I almost forgot to mention. And that is, we need to go back into the RoboComposer folder and find this file, user settings CFG. CFG is config files, the configuration file for the user settings. Open that up in Notepad, and then what we need is to put in our email address. And you may remember when you signed up for the user account on the website, you should have gotten an email, and that email would have contained like a access code, an authorization code. Here it's called auth token. You're going to copy that from your email and just paste it in here, and then you need to save this. And what this does, this file, when the process is communicating with the composition engine in the cloud. It needs to know who it is that it's talking to, and that you're you're an authorized user. So add that in and close that file, and then we're ready to go to the next step. So we've given you a tour of the website and shown you how to download the RoboComposer desktop tools. So what I want to do next is show you the plugin manager, how you run a scan that's going to find plugins installed on your personal computer, and then we're going to set up connections to your virtual instruments. So what I'm going to do is click here on the desktop shortcut icon for plugin manager, and you can see I've already set up some connections here. I'm going to click here on plugins and just show you that when you run the scan, this is what it's going to look like. If you've got virtual instruments installed, you will find them. So I've done this in advance just to save a little time. But in your case, you would want to click the scan button here in the bottom right, and that's going to pop up a little window where you can select folders that you want to scan. And then when you're ready to start adding connections to your instruments, click on this Instruments button along the top menu bar. So I've already got a couple of connections set up to some virtual instruments, and I want to take you through the process and show you another one. So here goes. I want to set up a connection to Native Instruments Symphony Series Brass Ensemble. And so I'm going to click here in the top left, the button that says New, and this changes the screen to a mode where I'm going to be typing in some information. But first I want to select the plugin here on the right panel, and this is going to be an instrument that's in the contact right there, the radio button, and I'm going to come down and click on this gold button that says Set Plugin. Okay, and so I'm going to want to type in Native Instruments Symphony Series Brass Ensemble, and I can give it a short name of just Brass Ensemble, and then an abbreviation that would appear like on a printable score. Just give it BR for brass. And then what we're going to want to do next is click on this button, Load Plugin Instance. So I click on that, and it may take a few seconds for it's loading up the instrument, in this case, the contact, and we've got all these different libraries. So I'm going to scroll down here to Symphony Series Brass Ensemble, and I'm going to select this and drag it over here into this panel on the right. And so what it's doing now is loading the samples that make the sound. Okay, and so I'm going to just shift that over a little bit, shift this over a little bit. Now I want to change to this tab for Instrument Profile. And I want to make sure that I've got the MIDI channel selected to Omni. It's the same thing here in the contact player. MIDI channel is selected to Omni. And then I tell it what kind of instrument it is. In this case, it's a brass. And I'm going to drop down here and select Ensemble. And then Group Size. This is a large ensemble. Pitch type, definite, indefinite. That's like percussion, a drum, something that doesn't have a specific pitch would be indefinite. In this case, it's definite. Agility, debatable, could be high or medium. That just communicates to the RoboComposer composition engine information about how fast it can play notes, attacks. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that at high for now. And polyphony, is this instrument something that can play multiple notes simultaneously? Definitely. So it's not monophonic, it's polyphonic. And then when a note is attacked, how fast or slow does it take for that sound to reach the full level of sound? So this could be either fast or very fast. I'm going to go with fast here. Decay speed, once the note stops playing, how long is it before the sound like decays off? And is it fast or slow? And we'll just leave that at medium. And then key release timing. This is like once you take your finger up off the key on the keyboard, do you hear abrupt end of sound suddenly? Most instruments will give us a natural decay, and so we'll leave that at the default. Velocity. Does pressing the key on the keyboard harder or softer affect loudness? And I happen to know in this case, yes, it does. So I'm going to select key press speed influences loudness. Virtuoso mode. This is like something like the Josh Bell violin is a virtuoso instrument because he's doing performance nuances like heavy vibrato that varies automatically. You don't have to send any controller messages or anything like that. It just does it by itself. In this case, as in case of most ensembles, I would believe, it's not a virtuoso mode. So we're good with that. We're going to come over here to the keyboard map, and we want to find out what is the range of this instrument from low to high. And something very important I need to mention here is a lot of instruments will use what is the name that it calls middle C on the keyboard. So that's MIDI pitch 60. Now, if you consult a authoritative source of scientific pitch notation, you'll see that the International Standards calls MIDI C C4. That's octave 4. However, some instruments will call that C3, some will call it a C5, and there seems to be no real rhyme or reason or standard. And so for that reason, here we have the option to, by this radio button, indicate what the instrument calls MIDI pitch 60. What I recommend, however, is go ahead and say we're going to call it C4 is MIDI 60, and we'll figure out what the notes are by using the keyboard here on the RoboComposer plugin manager instead of the keyboard that's on the instrument. And so I need to find out what is the lowest note, so I'm just going to hit some low notes and listen. And what I'm hearing is A1 is the lowest note where I hear sound. So I'm going to click here, A1, and close that. And then the high side, I'm getting an E7 as the high note. So I'm going to click here on the range of instrument and E7. Now, this is kind of important. Is this a one-note event, a one-shot pattern, or a loop? So loop is obvious. It's just looping through continuously some sound, pattern sound until you take your key off the keyboard. A one-shot pattern would be you press the note and it's going to play some pattern and then stop. A one-note event is just you press the note and you hear one sound at that pitch. And so this is definitely a one-note event. And so we stay with the default there. Drum kit map is really for where we've got a drum kit where it's got like the snares, the hi-hat, the bass drum, and all of that. So that's not applicable to the brass ensemble. So we go on to key switches. And what key switches are is like what key on the keyboard would we press to give us like staccato, a sustain, in the case of strings, a pizzicato, a tremolo, that sort of thing. So here on the instrument, I can see it has some articulation switches, and it's saying C0. I know this is a transposing instrument, so I'm going to guess that it's actually an octave 1. So C sharp 0, it's showing a staccato. So I'm going to just take a guess and try C sharp 1 and see if that makes it staccato. It does. It does. Okay, so I'm going to document this by clicking here on this button, Add MIDI Key Mapping, and we're going to say the sustain was C1, and we're going to say the staccato on this drop-down menu, there it is C sharp 1. And that's a couple of good ones to start with. There's some other ones like a sforzando. So I'm going to skip those for now, but certainly you can add those others if that's helpful to you for the composition and what you're going to intend to use that instrument for. I want to turn our attention to control channels. Control channels is the tab all the way on the right. And this is like the channel through which signals are sent to the instrument to change things that are continuously controllable, like loudness, vibrato, expression, swells, things like that. And I've got some defaults set up here. And let's take a look back at our instrument. And here in the contact player, click on this automation button and then MIDI automation. And we can see it already has defined CC1, that's Continuous Controller 1 for Dynamics. So we want to come over here to the plugin manager and say Dynamics is 1. And it is not showing anything for expression. So it looks like my guess is Dynamics is going to be a combination of Dynamics and expression. What we can do here is set a controller to the volume. That's like the master track volume. What's the limit that it's going to allow? And then also I want to take CC10 and connect it over here to pan. That's like, pan is like, is the sound going to come out the left channel, the right channel, the center, or something in between those two extremes of right and left? But I see this instrument also has some controls for attack, release, tightness, and motion. What's going to be most useful is attack and release. So we can change the speed of the attack and release. So I'm going to just take one of these unused CCs and say, let's make 4 the attack and 5 the release. And then I need to come over here and find attack and release. And what did we say? 4 is attack, 5 is release, and we also said there is no control for expression. So I believe we've got everything we need. Now we've made some connection to the instrument. We've set up some control channels. So we want to come down here and click this button in the bottom right, Save Plugin State. Very important. And then we're going to save all this information that we entered. So we're going to click OK. And you can see now here in the left panel, it's added that instrument. And what I usually like to do at this point is make sure that I did everything right and my connection is still there. So what I like to do is come load the plugin instrument. I can click this button in the bottom right, load plugin instance. And there it is. And it still has the definitions I set up. And I can hear sounds. And I noticed I left it in the staccato mode as its default. I don't want to do that. I want to come back to this instrument and leave it in sustain. So I'm going to save the plugin state again and exit. And then let's load the plugin instance again and just make sure that sustain is going to be our normal mode. Yes, good, good. So that's all good. And I want to just click here on edit and just look through and see, did I leave anything blank? Did it save all of the information I entered? That all looks good. So I'm feeling good about this. So now we can exit the plugin manager. And we're ready next to start building a hint file. And we'll do that next. Do you remember the hint script example I showed you earlier? This thing? Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you an actual hint file in an ordinary text file that we're going to talk through line by line and just discuss. This isn't to try to teach you the hint language, it's just to expose you, give you a brief overview, and then I'm going to show you how we submit this hint script to the RoboComposer composition process and get music out of it. So what I've got on my desktop is an ordinary text file that I call Kaleidoscope. I call these little compositions I'm making for these videos kaleidoscopes, in that it's just kind of a series, a sequence of interesting little musical segments. So I'm going to open this kaleidoscope script and call it kaleidoscope number 1 and just talk you through line by line. So you can see up at the front, up at the top, it's got a line for who the composer is and what the title is. That appears on the printed PDF score. There's some audio file instructions, how many bits per sample and the sample rate you want. So if you want cinematic audio wave output, you're going to want to select 24 bits per sample and a sample rate of 48,000. So milliseconds of silence at beginning before sound begins. So what that is kind of like some moments of leader silence, so that when you start the audio file, it's not just suddenly sound. There's going to be some silence leading up to that that may help you in your editing. Seconds for virtual instrument samples to be loaded into RAM before beginning MIDI to wave conversion. That's in the process where the composition's been built. You're now at the step where it's converting a MIDI file to a wave file using your own virtual instruments that are installed as plugins on your personal computer. And usually you're going to need some time for the samples to be loaded up into RAM memory. If you start the conversion from MIDI to wave immediately, you may hear some of the samples not producing sound. So normally you're going to want to have some amount of time at the beginning of the process to allow for it to just load this up. Now I'm using 10 seconds here. You may find with some instruments you can get by with less, and some will probably need more, just depending on how many samples there are. Release sound, final release seconds. That's how many seconds we allow at the end of the music for the sound to decay naturally. So like imagine you've got music and the last sound is a gong and it's performing in a cathedral with stone walls, stone ceilings. So if you were to chop that music off instantly, chop the sound off instantly, it would sound really strange. So you want to have some natural time at the end for things to decay and just gradually fade away. Now all of that is optional. You don't have to have these lines in your script file, but it's recommended. You can almost just, once you get one of these set up, copy paste it into each of the files you use. There's also some defaults here for tempo and other things like the rubato. Do you want heavy rubato, light rubato, or no rubato, things like that. Some hints for how the harmony is going to be produced, what scales we want to use for this composition. And then some aliases. So like here you'll see instrument alias for winds, instrument alias for brass, instrument alias for strings. So like brass, you may recall earlier we set up a plug-in connection for the native instrument Symphony Series Brass Ensemble. So if every time in this composition we want to use the native instruments Symphony Series Brass Ensemble, that's a lot to type. So we set up the alias where we just say brass, and it knows where we say brass, then that's what we mean. And so here you can see some other instruments that I've installed and I've created alias for them. It just makes the writing the script a lot easier and faster, easier to understand, faster to write. Now there's some track volume limiter instructions here, and what that's about is like some instruments at their default mode are just super, super loud and overwhelms everything else. So you want to have the tracks with those instruments to be performed at a lower maximum level. So that's like your track volume limit, and it's expressed in percentage. So you can see here, like the Celesta, we want at 80% of the maximum. Now, the music instructions actually begin where we start saying the word segment, and you'll notice there's multiple segments. Okay, so this first segment here is 16 beats at a tempo of 20 beats per minute, and the rubato is subtle. We have the next segment is 4 beats with a tempo of 80 beats per minute and no rubato. And then we have a segment with 32 beats at a tempo of 80, and so forth. There's several segments in this until we reach the end. And down at the bottom, this is kind of important, we have a section called library. So library is where we can create instructions for reusable little bits of melodic fragments, rhythmic fragments. And so the RoboComposer engine is going to use those sort of like as a DNA from which it's going to, or a seed from which it's going to grow the composition by combining these fragments of rhythms and melodic patterns. And I'll be telling you more about this in some future videos. I will be sufficient just at this point to say that melodic instructions are using intervals. And like rhythmic instructions are notated with the idea of dividing a beat into 12 moments. So if we have 2/8 notes, 12 moments of beat, that'd be a 6 and a 6. If we were divided into triplets, that'd be like a 4/4/4. 16th notes we could notate as 3/3/3/3, with commas between them, of course. And if we needed some moments of silence, we'd put a R in front of that, like 3 moments of silence would be R3. So you can see here some rhythmic cells using that notation, and this horizontal bar, vertical bar between each of these little sections says that's a delimiter between a little pattern. So here in this example that I'm highlighting, we've got a little object called March with some rhythmic cells, and those are just little, like we said, little bits of DNA from which the music is going to be woven. And so I'm going to scroll back up. So looking here in our first segment, we're using, you see the word broken hearts, that's one of our aliases. We defined an alias for broken hearts. That's actually an instrument by the Crow Hill Company, the Crow Hill Broken Hearts. Crow Hill String Murmurations, I should say, the Crow Hill String Murmurations, Broken Hearts. Broken Hearts is one of the patterns in the String Murmurations library. And what we're doing here is a pad. And, you know, a pad is like sustained notes. And a lot of this is self-explanatory. MP, mezzo piano, and then octave 4 and octave 5, using the international system pitch notation that defines middle C as octave 4. So we're saying we want this music to be in octave 4 and octave 5 that's playing this pad at mezzo piano. Voice count 7. We want 7 voices. And then here you see a little hint for note connections, overlap. And what this is saying when we go from one note to the next, do we want them disjoint, or do we want them to touch, or do we want a little bit of overlap? For pads, you usually want a little bit of overlap. There's some pan instructions here. For this voice, we want to have it pan to the center. Now, delay compensation, what that's about is some instruments take some moments of time to build the sound when it attacks a note. And so you need to, like, if you were in your digital audio workstation, you need to shift it a little bit so that the note starts actually before the beat. And so delay compensation allows you to start, in this case, we're saying 50 milliseconds before the actual beat. Here we've got underneath this a hint for a harp, some melodic cells, rhythmic cells we've defined. It's playing pianissimo in octaves 3 and 4. You can see here we've got pan left, and we want to detune, meaning play it just a little bit off pitch to humanize it. And this is saying we want it to detune negative 50 cents. And that's probably going to sound like a high school orchestra. So I'm going to change that from 50 to 5, a cent being a full semitone. So 50 cents would be half a semitone or a quarter tone. We don't want that big a detuning. So I'm changing that to 5. Same thing for the one beneath it. We're detuning it up 5 cents. And so the glockenspiel. So the next segment, we have some instructions for a timpani. We want playing at fortissi, issimo, 4 Fs. Hope I said that right. And we're playing a pattern called door knocks. And we want the accent weight to be hammered and the accent placement to be random. And we're giving this line a name, calling it Bravo, so that we then on the next line can say we want to copy the line of whatever Bravo's doing and have the strings play the same thing staccato at forte in the bass region. And then we have another instruction here to copy that with the piano playing staccato, again in the bass region with aggressive accent. So there's some other patterns here. We can see something called spirals. Again, this is from the Crow Hill Company. And you can see some rhythmic cell instructions here. And I'm seeing here that we're reusing basically the same pattern 3 times. We could have put that in the library as a library definition, given it a name, and then just called it by that name. That's one of the neat things about RoboComposer, the scripting language, is the reusability. So once you build a pattern you like, give it a name in your library, and then you can reuse it over and over. And actually, it's a lot more powerful than that. You can build whole segments that give you what I call a texture, and give that texture a name, put it in your library. And then to get that texture, you just have a segment where you just call that name and you specify what tempo and how many beats you want for that texture, and you're going to get that texture. So for example, if you, let's say you set up some texture that's going to be for a really tense chase scene, maybe a foot chase or a car chase, whatever, and you give it a name like chase music or tense chase music. You could put that, build it to your liking, and then put those instructions in your library. And then anytime you need the chase music kind of patterns, just create a segment with calling that name, define the number of beats, the tempo, and you can actually add other objects into that segment to overlay as layers on top of that. So really neat, just the power that this has. So I'm going to save this. We made a couple of minor changes to that and exit out, and I'm going to show you how you get the composition process started. So you take this text file and just drag it into the folder hint queue. So now opening hint queue, there's our folder, that's the queue. Why is it called a queue? Because we could have more than one hint file in there, and we queue them up so that when we, if we had 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, we start the RoboComposer composition process, it's going to work through all of those. If we had 5, it's going to work through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's like a queue. And then as it works through the queue, it's going to produce, the composition occurs in the cloud. This is a cloud hosted service, but down comes a MIDI file, will be in your MIDI folder. There's going to be a PDF score, be in the PDF folder, uh, and then it will create the wave file, will be in the wave folder. Using that part of the process occurs on your personal computer where it's connecting to the instruments using those connections that we set up. So the wave file will be in the wave folder, and then there'll be an MP3, kind of lightweight, low resolution, can be helpful when you want to share something with someone, like as an attachment to an email, send them an MP3 file, like, hey, listen to this. And then those hint files that we dropped into the hint queue, after each file is processed and the music produced, it's going to move that file to the archive folder, the hint archive folder. So you'll see it moved into there after the composition process. So now to get the process started, all we have to do is click this button, Batch Composer. And takes a few moments to start up. It's initializing and uploading your batch to the RoboComposer engine in the cloud, and then momentarily we should see some activity start occurring here. One of the things you'll notice is that it tells us how many minutes of credits we've purchased, how many gift minutes we've had through like a promo code, how many minutes of those we've used, and what the balance of available minutes are. So if we didn't have enough minutes, it would tell us you don't have enough minutes to run this. So now it's running the composition process, and we're not going to takes a few minutes. So we're not going to sit through all of this. We're going to go next directly to looking at the music that's been produced. I hope you found the little miniature movie that you just saw interesting. The music that accompanied it was both composed by RoboComposer and performed by RoboComposer. The performance used virtual instruments I have installed on my personal computer here. I hope it gives you a glimpse into the possibilities of how scores for complete movies could be created using this automated scripting method. We just barely scratched the surface in what I showed you today in the scripting language. There'll be a lot more that's shown to you in upcoming videos. You can also look on the robocomposer.com website and find documentation on the documentation page in PDF format. Thank you so much for giving so generously of your time to watch this introduction to RoboComposer and being here. Your interest is greatly appreciated.